Chapter 8. Sleep eluded me that night. In Daillon, there's a story about a shegri, where the challenger was left alone in a room, blindfolded, and told to wait for the start of the torment. Somewhere in those dark hours of waiting, between the unknown and the unexpected, the anticipation of torture became unbearable. The challenger collapsed in screams of horror and died raving, unharmed and untouched. Daybreak came slowly, and with the first rays of light, Dalliser and the white Chak arrived, maliciously uninvolved, sniffing their way through the shabby poverty of the great hall. They took me to a lower dungeon where the slant of sunlight was less visible. Dalliser said, "The sun has risen." I said nothing. Any word could be interpreted as a confession of defeat. I resolved to give them no excuse. But my skin crawled, and I had that peculiar prickling sensation where the hair on my forearms stood erect with tension and fear. Dalliser said to the Chak, "His gear was not searched. See that he has swallowed no anesthetic drugs." Briefly, I gave her credit for thoroughness, even though I wondered why I hadn't thought of this. Drugs could blur consciousness or suspend reality. The white non-human sprang forward and pinned my arms with one strong spring-steel forearm. With his other hand, he forced my jaws open. I felt the furred fingers at the back of my throat, gagged, struggled briefly, and doubled up in uncontrollable retching. Her eyes, like poison berries, met mine as I struggled to stand, fighting off the dizziness of disgust. There was something about her expressionless face that stopped me in my tracks. I had been consumed with anger and humiliation, but now I realized that her calculated gesture was meant to make me lose my temper and weaken my resolve. If she could make me fight, if she could make me waste my energy on rage, my own mind would work against me to make me lose control before the end. As I swam in the intensity of her gaze, I understood that she never believed I had taken any drugs. Instead, she was exploiting the well-known Tranter aversion to non-human life, acting on Kirill's hint that I was one of them. "Blindfold him," Dalliser commanded, then quickly changed her mind. "No, strip him first." The Chak tore off my shirt-cloak, shirt, shoes, and breeches, and I felt a small victory when the claw marks on my shoulders, worse than those on my face, were exposed. The Chak recoiled in horror, and Dalliser appeared shaken. I could almost hear her thoughts. If he can endure this, how can I make him beg for mercy? For a moment, I remembered the months I spent feverish and half-dead, waiting for the wounds inflicted by Lyric to heal. I had believed that nothing could hurt me again, that I had experienced the worst of all suffering. But I was younger then. Dalliser picked up 2 small, sharp knives and weighed them briefly, gesturing to the Chak. Without resistance, I allowed myself to be pushed backward and spread-eagled against the wall. "Drive the knives through his palms to the wall," she commanded. My hands twitched involuntarily, anticipating the sharp pain of the steel, and my throat tightened with dread. This was a violation of our agreement not to inflict physical harm. I opened my mouth to protest, but her dark, fiery gaze silenced me, and suddenly sweat broke out on my forehead. I had placed my fate entirely in their hands, and as Kirill had warned me, they were not bound by honor to uphold their pledge to a Trantor. As my hands clenched into fists, I forced myself to relax. This was a mental game, a ploy to provoke me into breaking the pact and begging for mercy. I set my lips in a firm line, spread my palms wide against the wall, and waited stoically. Dalliser spoke in her lilting voice. "Be careful not to sever the tendons, or his hands will be paralyzed, and he may accuse us of breaking our agreement." The razor-sharp points of the knives touched my palms, and I felt the blood trickle down before the pain set in. With an effort that turned my face white, I did not flinch. The knives drove deeper, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Dalliser gestured to the Chak, and the knives dropped harmlessly to the ground. 2 tiny pricks, 1/4 of an inch deep, stung in my palms. Had I outsmarted her, or had she outsmarted me? If I had expected her to show disappointment, I was sorely mistaken. Suddenly, as if the game had lost its appeal, she made a gesture, and I couldn't help but gasp as my arms were forcefully lifted above my head, twisted and tied tightly with thin cords that dug deep into my flesh. The rough pull yanked my shoulders almost out of their sockets, and I heard the giant Chak grunt with effort as I was lifted up until my feet barely touched the ground. "Blindfold him," Dalisa said lazily, "so he cannot witness the sunrise or sunset, or know what is to come." A soft darkness covered my eyes. After a while I heard her footsteps fading away. My arms, pulled up and numbed by the cords, began to ache painfully. But it wasn't too bad. Surely this couldn't be all she had planned. I sternly controlled my thoughts, taking a tight grip on my imagination. The only way to deal with this was to take each moment as it came and not look ahead for even a second. First, I tried to get my feet under me and found that by standing on tiptoe, I could ease the ache in my armpits by loosening the rope above me. But soon, a cramping pain shot through the arches of my feet, making it impossible to bear my weight on tiptoe. I jarred down with a violent strain on my wrists and shoulders again, and for a moment the agony was so intense that I almost screamed. I thought I heard a soft breath near me. After a while the pain subsided to a sharp ache, then to a dull ache, and then to the violent cramping pain again. I struggled to get my toes under me, realizing that by allowing them to barely touch the ground, they had doubled and tripled the pain by giving me the false hope of relief. I have no idea, even now, how long I repeated that excruciating cycle, trying to find a foothold on rough stone, scraping my bare feet raw, arching upward with all my strength to release the strain on my shoulders, feeling the momentary relief of finding my balance and the pressure lightening on my wrists. Then the slow creeping of an ache, followed by a pain, and finally a violent agony in the arches of my feet and calves. And delayed until the last possible moment, that final excruciating pain when the full weight of my body dropped and pulled my shoulder, wrist, and elbow joints with a bone-shattering jerk. Once, I started to estimate how much time had passed, how many hours had crawled by, but I stopped myself. That would have been madness. As the process began, my mind refused to let go. I found myself obsessively counting the seconds and minutes in each cycle, stretching upward, releasing the pressure on my arms, feeling the pain creeping up my body. My throat was parched, but the rough treatment I had received made it impossible to estimate the time by my hunger and thirst. There were other unspeakable pains that I endured. To keep my courage up, I imagined all the ways it could have been worse. I banished the memories of torture and focused on the present moment. I reminded myself that the strongest of compacts bound them not to harm me, and that the end was fixed by sunset. But rational thoughts blurred into a semi-delirium of thirst and pain. The agony across my shoulder blades became a red blaze. I eased up on my toes, but the white-hot pain blazed through them. The rough stone on which my toes sank had been covered with metal, scorching my flesh. I hung in agony by my shoulders alone, lost consciousness for several moments, and woke up to the smell of burned flesh and a painful stinging in my toes. Dalisa murmured, "I do not wish to break our bargain by damaging your feet. It's only a little touch of fire to keep you from too much security in resting them." I tasted blood mingling with the sour taste of vomit in my mouth. I felt delirious, light-headed. After what felt like an eternity, I wondered if I had really heard Dalisa's lilting croon, or if it was a nightmare born of feverish pain. She pleaded with me to say a word and promised to release me. She even offered to set me free to seek Lyric, if only to plague Kyril. But I knew better than to trust her. I swayed, blinded, and considered yielding, but I reminded myself why I endured. As I knocked her out and escaped, I struggled to find the right words, but then a soft breath of anticipation saved me. It was just another trick. I felt limp and racked, no longer Race Drake, but a dead man hanging in chains with vultures pecking at my feet. The sound of boots echoed on the stone floor, and Kyril's bitter voice demanded to know what had happened to me. Dalisa remained silent, but I could hear her chains clashing lightly. Kyril muttered something about women having no talent for torture, and his voice faded away into the distance. Their words reached me through a windy ringing, like the howling of lost men dying in the snow-covered mountains. Kyril scolded Dalisa for letting me faint, calling her clumsy. Dalisa retorted with scorn, threatening to release me to find Lyric, whom the Trantors also had a price on. Kyril refused to let her bargain with the Trantorans, but Dalisa reminded him that he traded with them too. Kyril claimed it was for the honor of the Great House, but Dalisa accused him of only climbing the steps of the Great House because of Lyric. Carroll ripped off my blindfold and I winced in pain. He was angry that Dalisa had ruined their chance of learning what I knew about Millen. Dalisa revealed that Millen had appeared twice when she was with me, and Carroll demanded that she release me so they could bargain with me. The knowledge we have of Lyric is what he knows of Millen. "You really think I'd let you negotiate with Trantoran?" she taunted. "Weakling, this argument is mine. You fool, the others in the caravan will give me information if you won't. Where is Quinn?" From a distance of 1,000,000 miles, Carroll laughed. "You've got the wrong hawk, Dalisa. The catmen killed him." He unsheathed his knife and climbed to a perch near the rope binding my wrists. "Negotiate with me, Raskar!" I coughed, unable to speak, and Carroll persisted. "Will you negotiate? Put an end to this woman's farce that mocks Shegri?" The angle of the sun indicated that there was still light left. I found a fragment of a voice, not knowing what I was going to say until I had said it, irrevocably. "This is between Dalisa and me." Carroll glared at me, his anger mounting. With 4 strides he left the room, slamming the door and shouting harshly, "I hope you kill each other!" Dalisa's face turned red, and as before, I knew that the battle between us would be fought to a terrible conclusion. She touched my chest lightly, but the touch sent excruciating pain through my shoulders. "Did you kill Quinn?" I wondered, exhausted, what this meant. "Did you?" In a fit of rage, she cried out, "Answer! Did you kill him?" She hit me hard, and where the touch had been painful, the blow was a white-hot agony. I fainted. "Answer!" She hit me again, and the white-hot pain brought me back to consciousness. "Answer me! Answer!" Each scream brought a blow until I finally gasped. "He signaled, set catmen on us." "No!" She stood staring at me, and her white face was a death mask with living eyes. She let out a wild scream, and the huge Chak came running. "Cut him down! Cut him down! Cut him down!" A knife sliced through the rope, and I fell to the floor in a bone-breaking heap. My arms were still twisted over my head. The Chak cut the ropes apart, pulled my arms roughly back into place, and I gagged with pain as blood began to painfully flow through my chafed and swollen hands. And then I lost consciousness, this time more or less permanently.